3 days after we buried my son, his wife asked the lawyer when the money would be transferred. Not how are you holding up, Gerald? Not what do you need? Just when does the money move? I remember the exact moment. We were sitting in Philip Hartley's office, late afternoon, the kind of gray Portland sky outside that makes everything feel heavier than it already is. Philip was going through the trust documents, calm and steady the way lawyers are when they've delivered bad news before. And Sylvia was sitting there in a black dress, hands folded in her lap, waiting for the part that mattered to her. When Philip finished explaining the structure, she leaned forward slightly and asked the question. I didn't say anything, I just looked at her. And I made a decision in that moment that I've never second-guessed since. My name is Gerald Harmon. I'm 61 years old, retired construction engineer, Portland, Oregon. Spent 30 years reading blueprints and managing job sites and arguing with contractors about load-bearing walls. I'm not a complicated man. I don't like drama. I believe in doing what you said you'd do, keeping your word and staying out of other people's business unless they make it your business. Sylvia made it my business the second she asked that question. My son Owen gave me a warning about her. He gave it to me about 4 months before he died. We were sitting on my back porch on a Sunday evening the way we did most weeks. Owen had brought over ribs from a place he liked downtown. We'd eaten, cleaned up, and were just sitting there with the last of the daylight fading through the trees. Owen was quiet for a while. He did that sometimes, went somewhere inside his head and took a few minutes to come back. I never rushed him. Finally he said, Dad, if anything happens to me, watch Sylvia carefully, and if Kyle ever shows up claiming anything, make him prove it first. Kyle, my other son, or the man I believed was my son from a brief second marriage that lasted less than 3 years. He grew up in Nevada with his mother. We barely stayed in contact after the divorce. By the time he was a teenager, the phone calls had stopped almost completely. I hadn't seen him face to face in close to 8 years. I told Owen he was being dramatic. He was 36, healthy, running a company that was changing how supply chains worked across the country. Nothing was going to happen to him. He looked at me the way he sometimes did when he thought I was missing the point. Not impatient, just quiet. Waiting. Promise me, Dad, he said. So I did. 6 weeks after that conversation, Owen was dead. A helicopter went down during a site survey in the mountains east of the city. They found the wreckage the next morning. 2 pilots and my son. I'm not going to describe what those first days were like. There aren't words for it that don't sound like they came out of a greeting card, and Owen would have hated that. What I'll say is this, I kept moving. That's what you do. You make the calls, you handle the arrangements, you stand at the graveside and shake hands with people you've never met who tell you your son changed their lives, and you keep breathing because you don't know what else to do. Owen had built Vector Path Labs from nothing. He started it in my garage at 26, a year out of Oregon State, with 2 computers and an idea about using machine learning to reduce waste in freight routing. By the time he was 34, the company had contracts with 4 of the top 10 logistics networks in North America. The acquisition came through at $280 million. I remember reading the announcement on my phone and just staring at it. He was still driving the same used pickup he'd bought at 28, still showed up every Sunday, still fixed my gutters himself because he said contractors overcharge retired people. That was Owen. He'd been married to Sylvia for 3 years when he died. She worked in brand marketing, high-end clients, the kind of campaigns that run in glossy magazines and airport billboards. She was sharp and well put together and knew how to make people feel like she was genuinely interested in them. I tried to like her. Some days I managed it, but Owen's words from that Sunday on the porch never left me. And the moment Sylvia asked about the money 3 days after we buried him, those words came back like a switch being flipped. The trust held $200 million in structured assets, the core of what Owen had protected after the acquisition. Philip explained the terms carefully. I was named the sole trustee, not Sylvia. Me, that was Owen's decision. He'd made it 4 months before the helicopter went down, in a meeting with Philip that I didn't know about until after the funeral. Owen had been calm and deliberate the whole time, Philip told me later, like a man who was planning carefully for something he hoped wouldn't happen. Sylvia's question told me everything I needed to know about what was coming next. I told Philip I needed a few days before we discussed next steps. Sylvia didn't look happy about that. I drove home, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time staring at nothing. Then I called my brother Leonard. Leonard Harmon is 57, 4 years younger than me, and the most careful person I know. He's a CPA, has been for over 25 years. He doesn't panic, he doesn't speculate. He just listens, asks 2 or 3 questions, and then tells you what the situation actually is. I drove to his house that evening. We sat at his kitchen table and I told him everything. The trust, Sylvia's question, Owen's warning from the porch, the name Kyle. Leonard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then he said, "You need someone who finds things." That was it. No long speech. No telling me I was overreacting. Just the practical next step. He gave me a name. Nolan Briggs, a financial investigator based out of Seattle. Leonard had used him years back on a business dispute involving a contractor who had been billing for work that wasn't done. Nolan had found the paper trail in under 2 weeks. I drove up to Seattle the next morning and met Nolan in person. I'm old-fashioned about that. If I'm paying someone to dig into my family's business, I want to look them in the eye first. He was in his mid-40s, lean, the kind of guy who doesn't say much, but you get the sense he's filing everything away. He had a small office near Pioneer Square, nothing fancy. I told him what I needed. He took notes by hand, which I respected. When I finished, he said, "Give me 3 weeks." I said fine and drove back to Portland. The next 2 days were quiet, then everything came in at once. Kyle Mercer called me on a Tuesday evening. I hadn't spoken to him in close to 8 years. He opened with condolences, said how sorry he was about Owen, said family was what mattered most at times like this. He had a smooth way of talking, the kind where every sentence sounds reasonable until you add them all up. About 4 minutes in, he got to the point. He had a lawyer. He believed the trust was legally vulnerable. He was Owen's half-brother, biological family, and he was prepared to file a formal claim against the estate. I listened. I said very little. I told him I'd pass his information to Philip Hartley. Then I hung up. Less than an hour later, Sylvia called. She told me she was pregnant. Owen's baby, she said she'd found out shortly before the accident and hadn't had the chance to tell him yet. Then she told me she and Kyle had spoken, that they both felt I was being unreasonable about the trust, and that they were prepared to pursue legal action together if I didn't agree to a more cooperative arrangement. 2 people, 1 phone call each, same evening. That was not a coincidence. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat in the kitchen with the lights on and thought about Owen. Not the company or the money or any of it, just Owen. I thought about when he was maybe 9 or 10 and used to follow me around job sites on weekends. I'd give him a hard hat and a clipboard and he'd walk around taking notes on things, completely serious, like he was documenting everything for a report. The foreman used to laugh about it. One of them told me once, "That kid doesn't miss anything." He was right. Owen never missed anything. I thought about the year his mother got sick, when Owen was 19 and in his 2nd year at Oregon State. He drove home every weekend that year, didn't complain once, just showed up, helped with whatever needed doing, and drove back Sunday night in time for Monday classes. I thought about the last Sunday before the accident. He'd come over with ribs and we'd watched part of a game and talked about nothing in particular. He seemed relaxed, happy even. When he left, he gave me one of those brief, firm hugs the way men do when they don't want to make a big deal out of something. I watched him pull out of the driveway in that old pickup. I didn't know that was the last time. Sitting in the kitchen that night after the 2 phone calls, I made myself a simple promise. I was going to do exactly what Owen asked me to do. I was going to watch carefully, I was going to make people prove things, and I was going to use every legal tool available to me to protect what my son built. The next morning, Philip Hartley's office called to let me know Kyle's lawyer had officially filed a motion challenging the validity of the trust. The claim was that I had exerted undue influence over Owen during the drafting process, that I had manipulated my own son into cutting out his wife and giving control to me instead. 2 days after that, Sylvia's lawyer sent a letter demanding immediate access to trust funds for the benefit of the unborn child. I forwarded both documents to Philip and told him to respond by the book. No shortcuts, no fast settlements. We were going to follow the trust exactly the way Owen wrote it. Then I waited for Nolan Briggs to call. Nolan called on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks to the day after our meeting in Seattle. He didn't give me anything over the phone. He just said, "You should come up. There's a lot to go through." I drove up the next morning. His office looked the same as before, small. Nothing on the walls, a desk with 2 chairs across from it. He had a folder waiting, thick. He opened it without any preamble and started walking me through what he'd found. Kyle Mercer had a history. In the 7 years before Owen's death, he had been involved in 2 separate estate disputes. Neither involved his own family. In both cases, he had identified a situation where a wealthy person had died and the inheritance structure was unclear or contested. He inserted himself with a legal claim, hired an aggressive lawyer, and made noise until someone paid him to go away. One case settled for $180,000. The other was still unresolved but had gone quiet. He also carried $340,000 in personal debt spread across 3 creditors. He had no stable income that Nolan could identify. His last registered business address was a mailbox rental in Reno. This was not a grieving half-brother reaching out after a tragedy. This was a pattern. Kyle had done this before and he knew exactly how to do it. Then Nolan turned to the pages on Sylvia. She had made 3 trips to Denver in the 4 months before Owen died. Each trip was booked under a business account and listed as a client conference. Nolan had checked with 2 of Sylvia's known clients in that period. Neither had any record of a meeting in Denver. The man she met on all 3 trips was named Troy Weston. He was 38, had founded a mid-size real estate development company that collapsed in 2021 and had been living on credit and borrowed money ever since. The last confirmed meeting between Sylvia and Troy Weston was 6 weeks before Owen's accident. Nolan slid a separate page across the desk. It was a summary of a conversation he'd had with a woman named Brooke Hadley, a former colleague of Sylvia's from a marketing firm in Seattle, where Sylvia had worked before her current position. Brooke had been easy to find and willing to talk. She said that during the time she worked with Sylvia had been very clear about not wanting children. Not vague or undecided. Clear. She used to say it would derail everything she was building professionally. Brooke remembered it specifically because Sylvia had been firm about it in a way most people weren't. I sat with all of that for a minute. Nolan waited. He was good at that. I told him I needed him to keep documenting and that I'd be in touch with my lawyer. He said he'd send everything over to Philip Hartley directly. I thanked him, drove back to Portland, and called Philip from the road. Philip had his own news. He told me he had been doing a full review of the trust documents, going through every page Owen had filed. Toward the back, in a section most people would have skimmed, Owen had included a handwritten addendum. It was signed and dated, witnessed by Philip himself at the time of signing. Philip said he had flagged it when Owen filed the trust, but hadn't brought it up yet because he wasn't sure it would become relevant. He read it to me over the phone. It said, if Kyle Mercer files any claim against this estate, require DNA verification before any legal proceeding advances. I have conducted my own research and have reason to believe he may not be a biological Harmon. I had to ask Philip to read it again. Owen had known, or at least suspected. He had done his own digging at some point before he died and come to the same conclusion I was now arriving at through Nolan's report. And instead of having a difficult conversation about my second marriage and a man I barely knew, he had simply built the answer into the legal structure of the trust itself. He put the mechanism in place, quietly, without making it my problem until it needed to be. I pulled over on the highway because I didn't trust myself to keep driving for a minute. I thought about Owen sitting across from Philip in that office, calm and deliberate, signing documents, planning for a future he hoped would never arrive. A 36-year-old man who had already thought 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room, the way he always had. The kid with the clipboard on the job site. The one who never missed anything. I sat there on the shoulder of the road for a while. Then I pulled back onto the highway and drove home. That evening, I called Philip back and told him to file the addendum with the court and request mandatory DNA testing for Kyle Mercer before any legal proceedings could move forward. The clause was Owen's, signed and witnessed, legally binding. Kyle's lawyer objected immediately, said it was harassing, said it was Gerald Harmon trying to manipulate the process. The louder they got, the more the court paid attention. The judge reviewed the addendum and granted the order. DNA testing was scheduled for the following week. Kyle had no legal ground to refuse. The DNA testing facility was a clinic in downtown Portland, clean and professional, the kind of place that handles these cases without making you feel like you're on a TV show. Philip had arranged everything through certified channels so the results would hold up in court. Kyle showed up with his lawyer. He walked in like a man who had already decided the whole thing was beneath him. Arms crossed, jaw tight, talking quietly to his attorney the entire time while they waited for the technician. He didn't acknowledge me. That was fine. I didn't need him to. The test itself took less than 10 minutes. A cheek swab, a sealed sample bag, documentation signed by both sides. The technician explained the results would be processed at an independent accredited lab and returned within 7 to 10 days. Kyle said something to his lawyer on the way out, something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, the lawyer nodded but didn't look particularly confident. I drove home and did what I'd been doing for the past several weeks. I kept my routine, coffee at 6 in the morning, gym by 6:30, errands, meals, the occasional call with Leonard or Philip. Normal life, the kind of steadiness that drives impatient people crazy, which was fine by me. On the 8th day, Philip called. He didn't say much over the phone, just, the results are in. Can you come to the office this afternoon? I was there by 2 o'clock. Kyle and his lawyer were already in the conference room when I arrived. Kyle was sitting back in his chair, arms still crossed, doing the thing people do when they're trying to look unbothered. His lawyer had a notepad out and a pen in his hand, ready to find something to argue about. Philip sat down, opened the envelope carefully, and read the summary page. Then he looked up and said it plainly. The probability that Kyle Mercer was a biological relative of the Harmon family line was 0%. The room went quiet. Kyle's lawyer spoke first, said the lab must have made an error, said the chain of custody needed to be reviewed, said he intended to challenge the methodology. Philip slid a copy of the full report across the table and told him the lab was fully accredited for legal paternity proceedings and that the results had been cross-verified internally before being released. Errors of this magnitude simply didn't happen in controlled testing environments. Kyle said nothing for about 30 seconds. He was staring at the report without picking it up. Then he said the results were being manipulated, that I had arranged this whole thing, that Owen would never have wanted his family treated this way. I looked at him when he said that. I didn't raise my voice. I just said Owen wrote the clause himself. Owen's signature is on that addendum. You can read it on page 11. Kyle's lawyer picked up the report and found the page. He read it. He set it back down. After that, neither of them had much to say. The legal proceedings collapsed the same afternoon. The results were filed with the court. Every claim Kyle had submitted, the undue influence argument, the heirship assertion, all of it had been built on one foundation, that he was Owen's biological half-brother and therefore a legitimate family claimant. With that gone, there was nothing left to stand on. Kyle's lawyer withdrew from the case the next morning. Kyle stopped returning calls to Philip's office. I didn't file anything against him. I didn't pursue damages or report him to anyone. The truth had done what it needed to do, and that was enough. Some people believe in making an example. I believe in closing the door and moving on. The second DNA test was scheduled a week later. This one was different. Sylvia came alone. No lawyer this time, which surprised me. She carried Noah in a car seat, the baby just a few weeks old. He was small and quiet and spent most of the appointment staring up at the ceiling lights with the focused expression that newborns have, like they're trying to figure out everything all at once. Sylvia sat across from me in the waiting area while the technician prepared. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the baby. The kind of tired that comes from being on the wrong side of something for too long. She didn't try to make conversation. Neither did I. The sample collection was quick, same process as before. Swab, seal, documentation. The technician told us 7 to 10 days again. When we stood to leave, Sylvia paused near the door. She looked at Noah in the carrier for a moment, then looked at me. She said, "I know this isn't what either of us wanted." I said, "No, it isn't." She nodded and walked out. I stood there for a minute before I followed. I looked at the door she'd just gone through and thought about Owen again, about how careful he had been about everything in his life except maybe who he married. And I thought about the baby in that carrier, who had no say in any of it, and who was going to need someone in his corner regardless of what the results said. I drove home and waited. The results came back on a Monday morning, 9 days after the test. Philip called me at 7:42 a.m. I was on my second cup of coffee. He said he wanted me to come in same as before. I asked him if he could just tell me over the phone. He said, "Gerald, come in." I was at his office by 8:30. Sylvia was already there. She was sitting in the same chair as the first time, the one closest to the window. Noah was in the carrier beside her asleep. She had dark circles under her eyes and her hands were folded tight in her lap. She looked up when I walked in but didn't say anything. Philip opened the envelope. He read it through once before he spoke, then he set it on the desk and looked at both of us. The baby was Owen's. The probability of paternity was 99.97%. Confirmed. Sylvia let out a breath that she had probably been holding for 9 days. Her eyes filled up, but she didn't cry. She just looked down at Noah and kept it together, which I respected. I sat with that number for a moment. 99.97%. Owen's son, my grandson. Philip waited for both of us to settle before he continued. He explained that while the DNA confirmed Noah as Owen's biological child, the trust structure remained in place exactly as Owen had written it. Sylvia had no direct authority over the assets. The child was the legitimate heir, but the funds would be managed and protected until Noah was an adult. Sylvia nodded slowly. She didn't argue. She didn't ask about timelines or transfer dates. She just nodded. When Philip finished, she looked at me and said, "I need to tell you something." I told her to go ahead. She said that about 2 months after Owen's funeral, Kyle Mercer had approached her at a gallery opening. He had framed the whole thing as two people looking out for what they deserved. He told her I was trying to cut her out, that I had never liked her, that the trust was just a way for me to keep control of Owen's money permanently. He said a legal alliance made sense, that together they had leverage. She believed him. She said she was grieving and scared, and the story he told her fit the fear she was already carrying. She found out about his history the same way I did through Nolan's investigation. Philip had shared the relevant portions with her lawyer as part of the proceedings. When she read the report and understood what Kyle actually was and what he had actually done in those two previous cases, she withdrew from the legal alliance immediately. She said, "I didn't know, I want you to know that." I told her I believed her, Then I told her what I had decided. A protected subtrust of $100 million would be established for Noah, managed by Philip's firm and overseen by Leonard until the boy was old enough to make decisions for himself. Education, healthcare, housing, everything he would need, structured carefully the way Owen would have wanted it structured. Sylvia would receive a separate financial arrangement to support raising Noah, not a lump sum, not direct access to the trust. A managed monthly support with clear terms reviewed annually. The focus would always be the child, not the account balance. The rest of the original trust would remain as Owen had written it, administered according to his instructions for as long as necessary. Sylvia was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Owen trusted you for a reason." I didn't have an answer for that. I just picked up my copy of the paperwork, thanked Philip, and told him to start drafting the subtrust documents. On the way out, I stopped next to Noah's carrier. He was still asleep, one small fist curled up near his chin. He had Owen's forehead. I hadn't noticed that the first time. I stood there for a minute longer than I needed to. Then I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the burial. I'm not a man who visits graves regularly. I'm not sure it does much, but that day it felt right. I stood at Owen's headstone for a while. No speech, just stood there. Thought about the porch, the ribs, the fading light through the trees, and a 36-year-old man who had already written the answer into the documents before anyone knew there was going to be a question. He had trusted me to hold the line. I had held it. I put my hand on the stone for a second, then I walked back to my truck and called Leonard to go over the paperwork. Some things don't end, they just move into the next chapter. If you've ever been the person in the room trying to protect something that someone else built, while everyone around you pressures you to let it go, you already know what this feels like. It's not dramatic. It's just a decision you make every single day until the truth comes out on its own. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what you think Gerald should have done differently. I read every one, and if someone in your life is going through something like this, share it with them. Sometimes it helps just to know someone else held the line and made it through.